The first of our loud salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Third, with your loudest voices, in honor of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Amr bil Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar, otherwise known in the English language as enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, is one of the most important acts in the religion of Islam. An act which is both individual and collective, and indeed an act which is important in the social spectrum of the religion of Islam. And an act which is at the very root of the religion of Islam. For as we know, Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar is one of the furu' ad-din, one of the roots of the religion. And therefore it is as obligatory an act as every one of the other roots of the religion. For example, Salah is one of the roots, Sawm is one of the roots, Hajj is one of the roots, Zakat and Khums are of the roots. Likewise, Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar are amongst the roots of the religion of Islam. And the idea given in the religion of Islam is that any great community is one which constantly enjoins the good and forbids the evil. Therefore you find throughout history that many of the successful communities were those who were built on the legacy of enjoining that which is good and forbidding that which is evil. Whereas on the contrary, many of the weaker communities were those who neglected enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And therefore you find within Islamic thought the concept of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil was vital to the structure of any successful community. Yet we find that on many occasions, many neglect enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And the neglect of Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar is normally because of two reasons. The first reason is because of fear of the governor of the time, or fear of the Sultan, or fear of the Khalifa. Because many people fear speaking out against the evil because they feel that when they will speak out, that will cause their death. And therefore you find that many throughout history chose to remain silent because they knew that had they spoken out, they would not have a life anymore. And that's why we find that the greatest leaders in Islamic history were those who allowed their people to speak out against their policies. I remember when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz became Khalifa of Bani Umayyah, the first words he said when he became Khalifa was that many people normally choose a leader to rule over them, whereas I ask you to rule over me. Anytime you see me doing good, enjoin it. But when you see me doing bad, speak out against me and correct me. Yet we find many in history who did not enjoin the good or forbid the evil, normally done this out of fear, number one. Number two, we find that there is also a psychological reason why many do not enjoin the good and forbid the evil. And that is the reason that many people give who say, as long as I am good, why should I care whether people are bad, evil, or good? As in, I will look after my religiosity, I will remain religious, but I won't interfere in the affairs of others. What people decide to do, let them decide. And if there is evil in the world, let others speak out. Whereas I am more concerned about me being good. Whereas when one examines the Holy Quran, one finds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stresses on the idea that the best of the communities is not one which remains silent when they see a governor who is tyrannical, but rather are those who speak out when they see a ruler who is tyrannical. That's why in the Quran, for example, in Surah 3, verse 104 of the Quran, Allah says, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. You were the greatest nation sent to mankind. You constantly enjoin the good and you constantly forbid the evil. Likewise, we find in the Quran that when the Muslims built the Islamic state in Medina, as we know, Rasulullah was in Mecca for 13 years. Then he was in Medina for how many years? 10 years. When he built the Islamic state in Medina, the aim of the Islamic state was not, for example, to become a strong economic state, or a powerful state of an army and a military dictatorship. No. The aim was a state where you were able to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Hence we find in Surah 22 verse 40 and 41 of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what the aim of an Islamic state is. الَّذِينَ إِن مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. The aim of an Islamic state is to build the worship aspect of a community, but also to build the social aspect. And the social aspect comes in Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. Likewise, we find again in the Quran that when Luqman spoke to his son, one of the first pieces of advice he gave his son was not just how to pray, not just how to obey one's parents, but also he said to him, Ya bunay, aqim as-salata wa'mur bil-ma'ruf wanha 'anil munkar. Meaning what? Meaning that amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahi 'anil munkar is part of a furu' ad-din which has to be established in the child from a young age. That it is the role of the father and the role of the mother from a young age to instill enjoining the good and forbidding the evil in their children. Why? Because this builds a child who has a social vision of the world around them. Many times the vision of our children is purely dogmatic, purely following principles of the religion, but there is no vision whatsoever. Whereas when a father instills from a young age to his child that, look, whenever you see good, praise it, but whenever you see bad, speak out against it, that is the method a child is to be brought up according to Luqman. That's why the ulama, when they discuss Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar, they discuss it in the area of fiqh, in the area of aqaid, and in the area of kalam. Let me explain. When Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar is discussed in fiqh, how is it discussed? It is normally written in the front page of your books of mas'ala of fiqh. Many of us have got the risala at home of a particular marja'. If you look at the front page, you will find that the discussion of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar already begins in the book of fiqh. Why? Because it is a social responsibility binding on anyone who passes bulugh. Because as soon as a person becomes baligh, they have a social responsibility to follow the laws of the religion. But then you will find that within following the laws of the religion, it is stressed that now you have a responsibility as a baligh to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. That's why you will not find any marja' who has a risala without the words Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar mentioned at the beginning of the risala. Because the aim was that when you learn the laws of this religion, apply them and spread them. And when you see people not acting them, then speak out. Number one. Number two, the ulama of aqaid discuss Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar under Usul ad-Din. Which part of Usul ad-Din? Under the area of Qiyamat. Because we know Usul ad-Din is 5. Tawheed, Adala, Nubuwa, Imama and Qiyamah. They normally discuss Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar under Qiyamah. Do you know why? Because the best action which reminds somebody of the Day of Judgment is Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. How many times do you remember death and the Day of Judgment when somebody says to you, why don't you perform this good act? Don't you know you'll be rewarded for it on the Day of Judgment? Why don't you stay away from this evil act? Don't you know you'll be punished on the Day of Judgment? There is not a single of the furu' ad-din that reminds you of Qiyamah like Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. As in how many times as parents you find we remind our children of hell and heaven through Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. That without it being in our household, there is no consideration that one day there is an exam. As in when we speak to each other, we remind each other that one day we will be questioned on every penny that we earned. We will be questioned on every deal we acted. When you act this act, what you are doing is making a link between Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar and Qiyamah. And therefore, Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar is discussed always under the Day of Judgment. Number 3, there is a beautiful discussion on Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar, where there is a difference between Ayatollah al-Burujurdi and Allam al-Hilli. And it's a discussion deep-rooted in philosophy and forms the basis of our lecture tonight. Let me explain. The question was posed, is Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar something natural or something which is learned through religion? Because the ulama asked the question that if I picked a Christian from the street now, or I picked a Hindu, or I picked a Jew, would this person have it within their nature already to enjoin the good and forbid the evil? Or is it that enjoining the good and forbidding the evil is something you learn in religion only? If you did not have a religion, you'd never know you should enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Ayatollah al-Burujurdi was of the opinion that Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar is something natural in every human being, irrespective of whether they are Muslim or not. What do we mean? He used to say, even if you find me now somebody who is a non-Muslim, even though he doesn't know about Islam, he will still find it important to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. And he gave the example in a famous piece of Persian poetry about a blind man walking towards a well. Let me explain. Imagine now you are an observer and I am sitting down. You are an observer. You as the observer are a non-Muslim. I am sitting down in a certain piece of land. I suddenly see a blind man walking. And I see that there is a well where you take the water out from. I can see that the blind man cannot see the well. Now, you as the observer are a non-Muslim. You are watching my behavior. Am I going to stand up and do something, or am I just going to stay sitting down? Because this blind man, if he continues walking towards the well, he's going to fall inside the well. As he's not going to see the well in front of him, all of a sudden he's going to fall. Allama al-Burujurdi was of the opinion that if the bystander who is watching my action, even if he is not a Muslim, if he sees that I sat down and I didn't help the man, and the man fell in the well, and I sat and done nothing about it, he said that person, even if they are not a Muslim, will say that what I did was wrong. And that what I should have done was enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Because in his opinion, it's natural in every human being to perform Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar. Allama al-Halli differed with this opinion. He said no. Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar is learned through religion, not something just natural. In this lecture, we'll see how Allama al-Halli defines this. Therefore, when we study Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar, we find our Holy Prophet instructing us about the punishment that comes to those who do not perform Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar. As in one hadith of our Holy Prophet, he was once asked, Ya Rasulullah, who is the weakest person? And he replied by saying, the weakest person is the one who sees evil but does not speak out against it. Because you find that many times we imagine the weak as being someone who cannot lift something heavy. Or the weak as being someone who emotionally is very down. No. Rasulullah said the weak are those who see evil but do not speak out against evil. That's why another hadith, our Holy Prophet says that beware, if you do not speak out against tyranny and oppression, then one day the bad amongst you will rule. And that when you supplicate to Allah, your supplication will not be accepted. In another hadith he says, wail. You know in the Quran, sometimes Allah says, wailun likulli humazatin lumaza. Or sometimes in the Quran, Allah says, wailun lil musallin. Wail is one of the deepest pits in hellfire. Rasulullah said, wail is for those people also who do not enjoin the good and forbid the evil. If a person does not perform Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar, when there is evil, that person wail is waiting for him. Therefore, how does Islam view Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar? The first question we ask is, how should one perform Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar? Number two, what are the three conditions for Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar? Number three, what are the three levels of Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar? Number four, how did Abu Abdullah act out Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar on the 10th of Muharram? When we examine this, we would have dissected the topic in complete depth. Number one, how does the Quran instruct us to perform Amr bil Ma'roof wa Nahi anil Munkar? I have a brother in my family, he's not religious. I have a cousin who never comes to the mosque. I have a sister who doesn't pray. I have a family member who's extremely rude. What does the Quran teach us about how I enjoin the good and forbid the evil with them? The Quran gave us two directions. The first direction was the idea that the Quran came forward and said, "Id'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izati al hasana." The first piece of advice the Quran gave us when we encounter somebody in our lives who is not religious is come and invite them in a way with wisdom and with a good word. Many of you, and you have heard the narration, Plato used to say, a wise man has something to say, whereas a fool has to say something. What we find is that many times when we try and make people religious, we mess up the whole action. That person never comes back to the mosque again. Why? Because the way we perform Ammar bil Maroof and Nahi anil Munkar is not with wisdom. Sometimes you find some of us shouting. Sometimes you find some of us who act arrogantly when we speak to someone, like I am there and you are here. Montesquieu used to say, a good leader does not stand above his men. He stands alongside his men. Meaning what? Meaning that the way Ahlul Bayt taught us, the first aspect of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil is to make the person you're speaking to feel they are on the same struggle as you. Let me explain. If now my sister doesn't wear hijab, I can either come up to her and say, you are the worst human being, you don't wear hijab, you're disrespecting Sayyida Zainab. But then I can also come to her and say, look, me and you both live in a world where it's difficult to be religious. But if I can struggle to be religious enough, why can't you struggle? Secular education, you're very bright. Your akhlaq are the best of akhlaq. As in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only wants you to come a bit closer, one more step. The difference between the first approach and the second is that the first one was with arrogance. Whereas the second one, I made the person feel I'm on the same struggle as them. Likewise, as a lecturer, there is a lecturer who talks down to his crowd. Then there is a lecturer who tells his crowd that, look, I live in the same world as you. I walk the same streets. I see the same film. I meet the same people. In the same way, I can be religious. I do not know why you cannot be religious as well. This type of attitude was the first. And it was known as the attitude of making a person feel that they are living in the same world as you, not in a different world. Number one. Number two, the second advice Islam gave us about the way to perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar was to stroke, then strike. You see, many of us, when we enjoin the good and forbid the evil, we straight away strike on the negative point of the person. You are a person who is rude, straight away. Whereas the Quran came and told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. O Prophet of God, if you were hard-hearted or you were severe, all of the people would have run away from you. Meaning what? Meaning Rasulullah, when he enjoined the good and forbid the evil, he would first stroke, then he would strike. Meaning what? Meaning whenever you look at a human being who has one negative aspect, don't concentrate on that negative aspect when you speak to them. Think, how many good things does this person have which I can speak to them? For example, that person has done a lot for charity. That person has built many buildings for orphans. But the one area that person is not good in is their salah. They unfortunately do not pray all the time. When I speak to them, do I straight away go on to salah? No. First stroke them. Make them feel good about what they are good at. Because every human being in this earth has positives and has negatives. When you stroke and then strike, you will find it is much better than striking and then striking. Because many times in our communities, the focus is on the negative rather than the focus being on the positive. And when the focus is on the negative, nobody will change. I remember fourth Imam was one day walking. Hassan ibn al-Musanna saw him. When Hassan ibn al-Musanna saw him, he said to him, you are a person who is not acting as you should be. And you are a person who has neglected the message of your grandfather. And you are a person who people should oppose. The Imam looked at his companions. His companions thought at that moment the Imam's going to reply. The Imam simply walked away. He let that person abuse him and walked away. The next day the Imam looked at his companions. He said, let's all go and meet Hassan al-Muthanna again. When they went to meet Hassan al-Muthanna again, Imam said, look at the way I'm going to behave with him and take from this wisdom. The Imam could have easily come to him and said, how dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? I am the son of Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. My great-grandfather is Rasulullah. You come and abuse me, how dare you? No. Imam came to him and said, oh Hassan ibn al-Muthanna, I did not expect such an action from someone like you. If I truly am as you have said, then ask Allah to forgive me. But if I am not as you have said, then I ask Allah to forgive you. Look at that. In this way, the Imam showed Hassan al-Muthanna two aspects. Number one, that me and you are both living in the same world. We are both struggling for the same aim. Then number two, he showed Hassan al-Muthanna that, look, number one, I'm going to stroke you. That I do not expect something like this from you. Look how suddenly what was hot became cold. He lightened the whole situation. Then he said to him, if I am wrong, may Allah forgive me. If you are wrong, I ask Allah to forgive you. This is what Islam wanted from Ammar bin Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar. Therefore Rasulullah said, there are three conditions to Ammar bin Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar. And this is vital to all of us. The first condition to Ammar bin Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar is make sure you have knowledge of what you're talking about. There's no point me coming and preaching to someone about hijab when half my daughters don't even wear the thing. And there's no point preaching to someone about salah when I do not know the laws of salah. There's no point me preaching to someone about jihad and I do not know the laws of jihad. There's no point telling someone about being religious when you yourself are not learned about the religion. The first condition of Ammar bin Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar, make sure you have knowledge of what you're saying. Do you know why? Because if you go to someone and try and enjoin the good and forbid the evil about a certain aspect, imagine they turn around to you and say, hold on, I have done one bad thing, but you have done a number in the way you've spoken to me. Or imagine they turn around and ask you a question you cannot answer. The best example of this happened with the second Khalifa of Islam. Second Khalifa demonstrated this example beautifully, where he showed that do not perform Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar unless you have knowledge of what you're talking about. As you know, when he was Khalifa, he would roam the streets. Imagine this street over here, he would roam it to see if anybody was doing any haram. Why? Because he felt it was his role as Khalifa to stop people from doing haram. If he heard that anybody was doing anything unlawful, he would make sure he stops them. One day he walked past a house. He heard a lady and a man in their house merrymaking and laughing. So what did he do? He jumped over the wall of the house. He came and he pushed the door and he entered and suddenly said to them, what are you doing? He noticed that there was a jar of wine, a jar of alcohol in them. They were drinking it. He said to the man, he said, how dare you drink alcohol while I am Khalifa of the Muslims? The man turned around to him and he said, oh Khalifa, I have committed one sin, whereas you have committed three. So he said to him, what do you mean? The second Khalifa was under the impression his Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar has passed all the conditions. He said to him, I have performed one sin. You have performed three. He said, what do you mean? He said, the first sin you have performed in Surah 49, verse 12 of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not spy. You were spying on my family without me knowing. Then he said, the second sin you have performed is mentioned in Surah 2, verse 189. That when you come to someone's house, enter through the door. Don't jump over the building. Then he said, the third sin you have performed is Surah 24, verse 61. When you enter somebody's house, make sure you say, Assalamu alaikum. He looked at him and he said, you try to perform Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar against me. There are conditions. And the first condition is make sure you have knowledge of what you're doing. Don't come and tell me about drinking alcohol. Okay, I have done something wrong. But you likewise have done 3 wrong acts in one act. Therefore the second Khalifa became embarrassed. He looked at him and he said, look, will you stop drinking alcohol? He said, yes, I will. He said, okay, I've pardoned you. He walked away. Here on the first level, the first condition, Ammar bil Maroof wa Nahi anil Munkar, make sure you have the ilm of what you're talking about. Otherwise there'll be a contradiction. Number two, the second condition, make sure your actions do not contradict your words. How many times have you seen people who tell you, make sure you pray on time, do not neglect your salah. Then one day you see him telling you he prayed Salat al-Dhuhr at 6:55. Hold on a minute. Yesterday you told me praying salah on time. Today you're praying Salat al-Dhuhr the latest time. Or sometimes you see someone telling you, make sure you go on Hajj. The quicker you go on Hajj, the better. You look at him and you ask him, have you been to Hajj? He said, not yet, but when I get time, I'll go to Hajj, inshallah. Those types of people fail the second condition, which is what? Make sure you act that which you preach to the people. That's why Amir al-Mu'mineen, there was never a contradiction between that which he preached and that which he acted. That on the Tuesday, Ali ibn Abi Talib would say, O mankind, oppose the oppressors and support the oppressed. Then on the Wednesday, he'd oppose an oppressor and support the oppressed. That's one day it's narrated, Ali ibn Abi Talib was walking on the streets of Kufa. He would walk, he would see the market, make sure nothing bad was happening in the market. Suddenly he saw a slave girl crying. He looked at her and he said, excuse me, why are you crying? She said that I am crying because my master sent me to buy some dates. A dirham of dates. She said, I went and I bought the dates and I've taken them back to my master and my master does not like the look of the dates. Therefore he said to me, take them back to the man who was selling it, and when you take it back, I want my dirham back. She said, oh man, imagine now, I went back to the man who was selling the dates and he said to me, whatever is sold cannot be returned. Oh man, will you not help me? Look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. The day before he had told the people, oppose the oppressor and support the oppressed. He saw that this young girl was oppressed. So he said, so where is the man who was selling you the dates? So she said, there he is over there. Ali ibn Abi Talib went. Would you believe in the streets of Kufa, there were people who did not recognize Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because which Khalifa walks with his people? Normally the Khalifa is in a palace while his people are on the markets. Whereas Ali ibn Abi Talib walked in the street, he came to the man. The man did not recognize him. Ali ibn Abi Talib looked at him, Salamu alaykum wa alaykum as-salam. He said to him, there is this slave girl. She bought some dates from you. Her master doesn't want them. And all it costs is a dirham. Just give back the dirham to her and let her go back to her master. The man said to him, whoever buys from me, I do not return. She has to deal with her problem. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, but she is an oppressed lady. The man said, who are you to tell me who is oppressed? He pushed Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now you know those moments when the whole street stands still. Everybody suddenly stands still. Why? Because you've pushed Ali ibn Abi Talib. As in you're asking for it. You've just pushed the man who has a good CV in terms of what he's done in the past. He pushed Ali ibn Abi Talib. Suddenly his companions who were next to him looked at him and said, do you know who you just pushed or no? He said, I do not know. Some man who claims that he is helping the oppressed. They said to him, you just pushed Ali ibn Abi Talib. The man, all of a sudden, the color changed of his face. Because he's thinking, Amr ibn Uwaid at his sword, Marhab at his sword, half of Badr at his sword, Khaybar by his one hand. He's thinking, I've just pushed the man who Islam was built on his war and his defense of the religion. He came to Ali ibn Abi Talib, pleading to him, please forgive me, I did not mean to push you. Amir al-Mu'mineen could have easily replied by pushing him away and saying, don't talk to me. Because we know that some of his Shia would have done that. Whereas Ali ibn Abi Talib is above what his Shia act, unfortunately. Ali ibn Abi Talib said to the man, do not worry. All I was trying to do was oppose oppression and support the oppressed. This is a slave girl. She has no family. Your role is not to harm her. Your role is to help her. Her master wants 1 dirham back. Give it back to him. Let him have his dirham. He said, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, I will return the dirham, I am sorry. Here the second condition of Ammar bin Maroof was fulfilled. Act what you preach. Because the worst thing in the eyes of Allah is those who act different to what they preach. There are many who preach, but their actions are completely different. Whereas Amir al-Mu'minin said, no, there cannot be a contradiction between your actions and your words. Why? Especially for an imam who is ma'soom. Because the very foundation of Isma is that his actions are no different from any of the words that he says. Number 2. Number 3, the third condition of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, don't speak to a fool and don't waste your time with them. How many years have we wasted with people we should have just left? As in, there are certain people who deserve the energy of the tongue. They deserve the energy of a heart. They deserve a headache in the night. Then there are others you think, what did I waste my time on? From the beginning I could see how arrogant they were. Why was I wasting my time? The Ahlul Bayt come forward and say the third condition of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, don't waste your time with a fool. Because you will speak and speak and speak and it's coming in one ear, out of the other. That the Quran says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُ اتَّقِ اللَّهِ أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّ بِالْإِثْمِ. There are those who you tell fear Allah, yet he takes pride in going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many in our families you find people who are not religious? You give your life away to make them religious, they act stubborn and arrogant in front of you. Don't waste your time. There are other good human beings across the road from you. Because many times we waste our time. This verse was revealed about a man by the name of Al-Akhnas ibn Shariq. Akhnas was a man who was one of the richest men in Arabia. Even when Rasulullah was going towards Ta'if, he asked Akhnas, Akhnas, please help me. Can I stay in your residence? Akhnas said, go and find someone else. My residence is not open for you. This Akhnas killed Rasulullah's cousin Abdullah in the Battle of Uhud. Yet Rasulullah would continuously persist trying to bring him towards Islam. On the day that he embraced Islam, having just recited his Shahada, can you imagine? You've just recited your Shahada. You're on your way back home. He saw a pasture, a field with animals grazing. When he saw it, he thought, why is somebody else having the blessings that I have? He lit the whole field and caused a fire to happen. Rasulullah worked from day one to try and bring this person towards Islam. But there are some people, their hearts are stubborn. However much you try, you are wasting your time. The Quran revealed the verse about him, that there are some people, they impress you when they speak. But whenever you tell them fear Allah, they take pride in sinning against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore the third group of the condition of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, when you meet a fool, do not persist. There are other good human beings who are willing to listen to the words of the religion of Islam. That's why Rasulullah said there are 3 levels of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. There are 3 different ways of acting it. The first way of acting Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar is for your heart to perform Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. That's the lowest level of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. What do we mean? Have you ever heard the English phrase, my heart is bleeding? Does it mean literally someone stabbed you and your heart began to bleed? No. What it means is I've heard about the plight of the Muslims in another part of the world. I cannot forbid the evil physically. Therefore, at least let my heart be sad as to the state of the Muslims in the holy month of Ramadan. Because we have brothers in Iraq who are being oppressed. Brothers in Lebanon who are being oppressed. Brothers in Pakistan in the area of Pachinar where they killed the followers of Al Muhammad who are being oppressed. The first level of Amr bil Ma'ruf is if I cannot do anything else, at least let my heart cry for those people around the Muslim world. That's why Rasulullah said, "Man asbaha wa lam yahtam bi umur al-muslimin falaysa bi Muslim." The one who wakes up in the morning and does not care about the affairs of the Muslims, he is not a Muslim. At least on the lowest level of Amr bil Ma'ruf, let your heart bleed. The second level of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar is to use your tongue to speak out against oppression. The lowest we said is the heart. The second is your tongue. Why?
Because Allah gave you that tongue not to simply remain silent. Martin Luther King used to say, at the end we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. That there are many in the world, they are silent when they see oppression. Whereas the religion of Islam said, Ammar bil Maroof wa nahi anil munkar. The second level of it is what? Is that when you see oppression, use your tongue to speak out. That's why I remember 7th Imam when he died. When the 7th Imam died, like every Imam, they have representatives, wukala. Like today you have maraja, they have a wakil in every country who looks after the khums of the Muslimin. 7th Imam, when he died, there were two personalities who had some of his khums with them. Their role was to give him the khums. Unfortunately, he died. One of them had 70,000 gold coins of the money of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Another of them had 30,000 gold coins. The one who had 70,000, his name was Ziyad al-Qandi. And the one who had 30,000, his name was Ali ibn Abi Hamza. Imam al-Kadhim had made them his wukala to collect the khums from the Shia and give it to the Imam. When the Imam died, suddenly greed overtook them. Ziyad told Ali, he said to him, listen, Musa al-Kadhim died. The next Imam after him is Ali ibn Musa. The best option for us is that we make a story that Musa al-Kadhim has not died and that he has gone into ghaibah. Because you know the idea at the time was being spread that there will be from the sons of Muhammad a man who will go into ghaibah and spread the religion at the end of time and bring justice. So they formed a sect by the name of the Waqifiyya. Waqifiyya means what? Waqifiyya means that sect which has stopped at Imam al-Kadhim. There was another of the companions of the Imam by the name of Yunus ibn Abd al-Rahman. Yunus ibn Abd al-Rahman was a man who was known for his Ammar bil Maroof wa nahi anil munkar. Money never got in his way. If he saw wrong, he would speak out. They formed a sect called Waqifiyya. They started spreading the idea that look, Musa al-Kadhim hasn't died. He's gone into ghaibah. And that because he's gone into ghaibah, we are his wukala. The khums will be in our hands. Yunus ibn Abd al-Rahman spoke out. He said, Imam Musa al-Kadhim has died in Baghdad. And the Imam after him is Ali ibn Musa al-Rida. When he spoke out, Ziyad al-Qandi and Ali ibn Abi Hamza came to Yunus. They said to him, listen Yunus, what's wrong with you? We've got 100,000 gold coins worth of khums. As in, do you know we can be multimillionaires tomorrow? We can be the richest men in Arabia. What is it that you want? I'll slip you 10,000 gold coins under the table, leave and stay quiet. They tried to buy his iman. Did he get sold or no? Never. He said, there is no way 10,000 gold coins will affect me. There is an imam by the name of Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, and he is from the successors of Al Muhammad. And you too will not stop his mission. They said to him, we'll become your enemies if you speak out. He said, I do not care. Because Imam al-Sadiq, listen to his words. He says, because Imam al-Sadiq said, if the elders and the leaders of a community do not speak out when they see evil, then know that the light of the guidance of Allah will leave that community. Because many times we are scared. He's my cousin. How can I speak out against him? He's my uncle. How can I speak out against him? He's been my friend since we were at school. How can I speak out? In Islam, when there's Ammar bil Maroof wa nahi anil munkar, there's no such thing as friendship. That tongue was to be used for you to speak out. When you see evil in the Islamic world or in your own small community, your role is not to remain silent, even if he is your own blood brother. Ibn al-Sakit lost his tongue defending Muhammad and al-Muhammad. That when Mutawakkil asked him, who do you love more, Hassan and Hussein or my children? Ibn al-Sakit could have easily thought that my bank balance is in the hands of Mutawakkil. How can I speak out against him? No. He feared for the bank balance of the day of judgment. That was the one he was more concerned in lifting. So do you know what he said? He said, I have more respect for Qambar, the slave of Ali, than I have for your own children. This caused his death and the cutting of his tongue. But for him, it caused his martyrdom. Why? Because he thought if the second level of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar is for a person to use his tongue to speak out against oppression, use his tongue to speak out against injustice, then I will use my tongue to defend the message of Rasulullah. That's why the third level of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar is the level that if you've used your heart, then your tongue, then if it means you have to use your sword to defend Islam, then use it. Look at Aba Abdullah. Whenever he spoke before the 10th of Muharram, he made clear that the aim of Karbala is Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. Listen to his words when he left for Karbala. He said, إني لم أخرج أشرا ولا بطرا ولا مفسدا ولا ظالما وإنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي رسول الله أريد أن آمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأسير بسيرة جدي وأبي علي ibn Abi Talib. What did he say? He said, I have not left Medina and Mecca for fame or for glory or for wealth or for kingdom. I have left so I can follow the sunnah of my grandfather Rasulullah. I want to enjoin the good and I want to forbid the evil and then follow the path of my grandfather and my father Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's why in ziyarah, what do we say to Aba Abdullah? أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر. We admit in our ziyarah that Aba Abdullah's message was nothing other than Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. That's why when he came on the 10th of Muharram, he has one line which shows you that even if I am meant to die, as long as Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar remains alive, so be it. What did he say? إن كان دين محمد لم يستقم إلا بقتل فيا سيوف خذيني. If the deen of Rasulullah will not stand except with my death, then O swords, come and take me. Meaning that those swords which strike me doesn't matter. As long as the seerah of my grandfather is protected, then there is no problem. That's why as a conclusion, when Allama al-Hilli differed with Allama al-Burujurdi, Allama al-Burujurdi said Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar is natural in every human being. Allama al-Hilli said no, it is learnt only through religion. Do you know why? Because he said only through religion. Do you know that Amr bil Ma'ruf has 3 conditions? Only through religion do you know that there are 3 levels of Amr bil Ma'ruf. As in if you go to a normal layman on the street and you tell him Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, should you act it? He'll say yes. If you then tell him what are the conditions, would he tell you that first you must have knowledge, then you must act your knowledge, and then don't speak to a fool? Would he tell you that your heart, then your tongue, then your sword? No, they wouldn't. That's why Allama al-Hilli said the true Amr bil Ma'ruf was embodied by Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. That he showed first his heart was angry with the evil, then he spoke out against Yazid's evil until the sword took him and he was victorious over evil. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us on the path of Muhammad and al-Muhammad, and to allow us to be amongst those who enjoin the good and forbid the evil. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be amongst the soldiers of our 12th Imam. Allow us to follow his message and his example, and allow us to enjoin the good and forbid the evil when he arises to bring justice on this earth. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it the loudest of salawat.